So the Holocaust, just to give you an idea about how many people were killed in the Holocaust, estimates are around 12 million people. Okay, so 12 million people. If you counted the tiles in G Hall right here, okay, in G Hall, each tile representing one person. We have about 1,900 tiles in G Hall. It would take 6,270 hallways to account for the 12 million people if each person represented one square. Or I teach about 172 students this year. I would have to teach for 69,364 years to reach 12 million. Or finally, Lake Travis has about 3,200 kids, 3,200 kids. It would take 3,750 Lake Travis high schools to get to 12 million. So that just kind of gives you an idea of the enormity of how many people we're talking about. As the Allies pushed into Germany and Poland, troops discovered and liberated concentration and death camps. So remember at the Nazis' height, they had control of most of Europe except for England, and they had pushed way into the Soviet Union. And then the Soviet Union started pushing back east, and the Germans were retreating east. And the Allies landed on June 4th, right, or June 6th in 44 on D-Day, and they started pushing the Germans west or east back into Germany. As those troops are pushing Germany back from the east and the west, they come across these death camps or concentration camps. We didn't know they existed. The Allies didn't know that was happening, or they didn't know to the extent that it was happening. Actual camps getting liberated. So the war at home, what did people who weren't in the war, that weren't soldiers, how were they helping out at home? How were they contributing to the war? War bonds. That's a big one. But first, FDR had to get the American public to kind of get behind the idea of a war. So he told Americans he hoped to establish a world based on 4 freedoms. The idea of freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. That was his pitch to the American public, that it's our job as the leader of the free world to make sure the entire world can live under these 4 freedoms. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom from want, freedom from fear. Wars are expensive. So to raise money, the government issued war bonds. Bonds that would, the money would specifically go to the war effort. Who can tell me what a bond is? What is a bond? Whether it's a war bond, a school bond, a city bond? Anyone know what that means? No. It's good.
Something that you like, it's like you're funding it, and then over time, once they have the money, then they give you increased amounts of money back.
Right. So say I'm going to contribute $1,000 in bonds. Okay, maybe it's a 5-year bond. The money goes in right away, so they get the money, and then they pay me back, and eventually they're going to pay me back like $1,050. Okay, that would be 5% return. Okay, that's a 5% bond. LTISD voted to just pass a bond last year or the year before, and it was a $250 million. So we sell these bonds, right, to the public. The public buys them because they want a safe investment, and they know they're going to get 3% or 4% return on their money, and then we get all the money up front to be able to build a new middle school. or the next elementary school or technology upgrades. All of that stuff, bonds are different than like taxes. Right now, the government runs a deficit. We spend more than we make, so we sell bonds, treasury bonds. Same thing. Here's some of the propaganda on the right. The propaganda would play a huge part in the war for both sides. Deliver us from evil, part of the Lord's Prayer, right? Buy war bonds. Doing all you can, brother? Are you doing everything at home that you can do while I'm fighting and injured? Right? Buy war bonds. For baby's future, buy war bonds. Victory gardens. Victory gardens. Encouraging everybody to plant their own gardens at home to grow their vegetables so that the soldiers who are fighting overseas for our freedom, right, can have the food that the farmers grow. Plant a garden for victory. We good? The government was concerned about the content and image of the war messages, so they created the Office of War Information. Picture of Uncle Sam saying, don't discuss the following things: troop movements, ship sailings, war equipment. If you have any information on any of those things, keep it to yourself. You never know who's listening. It's my favorite one. A housewife wanted for murder. Her careless talk costs lives. Our propaganda machine was strong. We had a good propaganda game. Americans were warned of the dangers of the enemy and tried to stir up distrust towards Germany, Italy, and Japan. So organized labor tends to be associated with socialism, protecting the rights of the worker, whatever. So this poster says free labor, like non-union labor, will help win the war. Here's a pretty racist poster, a Japanese soldier saying, go ahead, please, take day off. Because the less you work, the better our chances are for winning. Here's the award for careless talk. That's an iron eagle, a symbol of Nazi heroism. How about women in the workforce? Women joined the WACS, the Women's Army Corps. Women took over jobs formerly held by men, such as airplane production, shipbuilding, because the men went to fight, right? The men enlisted. So Rosie the Riveter celebrated women's new roles. So they're called soldiers without guns. I love that. They absolutely were vital to contributing in the war effort, even though they didn't carry guns. There's Rosie. How about minorities in the war? African Americans. African Americans played an important part, but they had to battle on two fronts, not just the enemy overseas, but prejudices at home. The Tuskegee Airmen served with distinction during the war. Again, I've sent this PowerPoint to you in your email, so if you don't get all the notes down now, that's okay. How about Mexican Americans? Mexican workers were brought to the United States under a program called the Bracero program to work. They often wore these things called zoot suits. Servicemen at home didn't much care for them because they were afraid they were going to take their jobs when they got back. They often attacked zoot suiters. There were things called zoot suit riots. So like that Hippo doc showed us earlier, FDR issued Executive Order 9066. Required all Japanese Americans, American citizens, mind you, of Japanese descent, to be moved into internment camps away from the west coast of the United States. Korematsu was an American citizen, and he sued the U.S., the United States government, for this forced relocation. The Supreme Court said relocations are okay on the grounds that in wartime, constitutional liberties may be limited. You can reduce the amount of your constitutional liberties, your 10 amendments, your Bill of Rights, during time of war. Here's some statistics about the economy during the war and how we were able to outproduce all the other countries. More stats. World War II was the biggest, deadliest, and most impactful war in world history. In World War I, about 10 million people were killed. Of those 10 million people that were killed in World War I, 86% were in the military. Only 14% were civilians, were non-military people. World War II, 51 million people died. And more than 2/3 were civilians, were just normal citizens, not soldiers. About 30 million, 35 million were citizens, whereas 16 million were in the military. World War II took the lives of more people, mostly civilians, than any other war. You can kind of see World War I compared to World War II, loss of lives. You can see that in the United States was relatively small in both. Probably not small if you were one of the ones that died, but same. Europe was destroyed by the war and lost its place as the epicenter of power in the world. This part's important. The United States and the Soviet Union emerged as superpowers. We compete with the Soviet Union for influence around the world. The United Nations was formed to replace the League of Nations, to try to have this world peacekeeping organization so that there will be no more wars. And all the different colonies around the world, especially held by England, started to demand independence. Several African countries that were colonies of European nations after the World War II started to demand independence. The biggest one is the leader who freed India from colonial rule. Anyone know? Short little bald guy. Say it again.
Mahatma Gandhi.
Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi, absolutely. We'll stop there.